Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow, the podcast from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business here at Lancaster University Management School. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jan Babington.
Jan, today we're going to be continuing our series on the Lake District farmers. But what we need to tell listeners is we're recording this episode before we've actually been and visited the farm. Because today we're in the studio and we're going to be joined by Dr. Laura Giles, who's working with the Lake District farmers on net zero meat production as part of a knowledge transfer partnership. And one of the things we're going to be discussing is exactly what that might mean. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
Give us a little bit of background about yourself, who you are and your journey to becoming a knowledge transfer partnership associate. And again, we'll be discussing exactly what that means a bit further on.
My journey to get to this point has been quite wide-ranging, some might say. I started my career as a researcher investigating mutations in cardiac contractile muscle proteins and what the effects those have on how your heart works, would you believe? And now I'm here looking at muscle in a different way in how we actually eat it. Since I finished doing that, I then followed my heart really into going to work outdoors, because I've always been a girl amongst nature, has been where I've wanted to be. So I took a few years doing conservation work and working in gardening, doing practical work and volunteering, and loved it so much I went back to school and did an MSc in environmental management. And that's kind of what's brought me here today, is consolidated what I've learnt so far in science research and practical work as well, and get to apply that in a really worthwhile project.
I can say you're definitely not alone within the management school here of having studied one area and then working in an area that is totally different. We do have a Doctor of Nuclear Physics who works in our Department of Economics, for instance. Not a member of the Centre, Jan, so I don't think we'll be discussing nuclear physics here. But yeah, there are so many people who, like you say, have that change of hat and go back to what they've always felt attracted to and connected to.
I think you can bring different things of different value to that new career direction as well, that perhaps might not have been thought relevant at the time, but actually they've proved to be really useful. Before
we get on to what you're doing at the minute, do you ever find that your work with regards to the muscles of the heart comes in any kind of use during your work now on net zero in farms?
Actually, yeah, it does, because I'm looking at, say, meat carcasses, and I can understand what I'm looking at because of how the muscles work and what the animals look like on the inside. So actually it's been really helpful, because I can talk to a butcher and know what they're talking about, and I can talk to a farmer and understand the physiology of the animal as they're talking then. So actually it has been quite useful.
I'll make my confession. During a recent episode, we discovered that I do actually know how to do maths. When it comes to biology and things, that is my nightmare subject. I've always got queasy when it came to biology and dissecting things and stuff like that. Not my favourite topic.
Well, I suppose that's quite helpful because, when we visit the Lake District farmers, there's some areas we might keep you out of.
Yes.
Yeah, please do.
We're really pleased that you're part of the KTP, or the Knowledge Transfer Partnership, and I should say it's towards net zero, so we're not prejudging that it can be net zero. So figuring out what can be done on the farms may lead us towards net zero. Tell us what a KTP is, and also what attracted you to this particular KTP, which it's easy to guess given some of the things you've said about your background. You can kind of see how you fit here. But what are KTPs, how do they work, and what are the benefits of having a knowledge transfer partnership?
KTP stands for Knowledge Transfer Partnership, and they're funded by Innovate UK, which is a UK government research funding body. They're geared up to help businesses solve a particular problem or a challenge they have within their business that can be helped with some academic expertise or academic resources they might not otherwise have access to. A knowledge transfer partnership project can last from between 12 and 36 months, and the one I'm doing is 24 months, so slap bang in the middle of that, and that's just defined by how intense the project is or how much money the business wants to put behind that particular problem they need to solve. As the researcher on this project, I'm the project lead as well as the researcher, and within that I get my own training budget to use to help develop my career and also gain skills which would be useful to transfer back to the business. I can access training from within the university and also bring information back to within the departments in the university that I've learnt out working with a business in the field, as excuse the pun in this case, but yes, so it's a very synergistic relationship between the business, the university, and myself in the middle, conduiting those channels of information to create a really good working relationship, which hopefully will last into the future.
So this is something then that benefits the organisation you're working with, it benefits you as an individual researcher, and it benefits the university that you're a part of as part of the project.
Sounds amazing, doesn't it? It's too good to be true almost, but yes, actually they are quite too good to be true. They've been running since 1975 now, so they've obviously been successful for many businesses, and Lancaster University's had many of them over the years across all the departments. So it's a format that works.
What I really like about this one is it brings me as an environmental accountant in touch with the soil scientists as well. So it also fosters that interdisciplinarity that we're looking for in trying to solve real world problems. Given that that is the case, this might be a good time to ask you to tell us about the project. What's in the essence of a project from your perspective? What are you working on to make towards net zero work?
Yeah, as you've already said, this is a multidisciplinary project, which is really exciting for everybody, really, because we don't often get to work across disciplines in universities. We can be quite siloed. So to bring all these people together in this one project is quite exciting. So there are 3 actual arms of this project. There's the soil science, and then there's some soil carbon modelling, and then there's the accountancy branch of it as well, which Jan is smiling at me widely whilst talking about that. So the first section is to look at the soil carbon stocks on the farms in the Lake District. So I should mention that we'll be looking at 4 case study farms from across the Lake District who supply Lake District farmers with their produce, which Lake District farmers will then sell to their customers. So we've selected 4 of their farms as representative case studies of typical Lake District farms that on a typical Cumbrian environment. So we'll be looking in the first instance to assess the soil carbon stocks. So this is really important because we don't really have a baseline understanding of the soil carbon in a remote area like Cumbria. It's not been widely studied. We have information about other types of agricultural systems, but not so much for the Lake District. So that's quite an important first part of the project and is part of the novelty of this research. Once we have that information, we'll be putting that into the second strand of the project, which is to do carbon modelling of the soil. Because of the brevity of the time we've got on the project, we'll be just taking the baseline data and putting that into the models rather than doing any repeat assessments going forward. But the beauty of using the modelling systems is we can put in lots of other variable data like climatic information or farm system information and mesh that all together and get numbers out the other end in a very clever way, which I don't wholly understand just yet, so I will admit that now. And that will be able to help us forecast how those carbon stored in the soil might change under different systems going forwards, or how resilient that soil might be under different climatic scenarios, and how the farms might manage their soil better to help keep hold of that carbon. And then the third arm of the project is the accountancy focus, where we will be looking at the finances of the farms as well as the carbon budgets on the farms. And the beauty of the accounting is it will help us bring the whole picture together, how we can use nature-based solutions to balance the environmental cost of our food systems that we have at the moment, because we hope that the farms in the Lake District are doing the best they can, and I believe that the majority are. But without the numbers and actually how we account for that and understanding how we can show that that's being done. The third element of the project is the accounting, the environmental accounting aspect.
We always come back to accounting somehow, don't we, Jan? Do you prime the people before they come in, throw them a fiver and say, just mention accounting at some point, and then you're happy?
I only invite people who like accounting, and that's been one of the joys of working with Laura, is that she's really enthusiastic about accounting. In fact, more enthusiastic than some of the accountants are, which is ideal. So let's tell our listeners about the accounting part of this, which is not the be-all and end-all, but which is an important part of the puzzle, I think.
Yes, the accounting will tie the other strands together. It will help us to understand the the bigger picture by pulling together the financial information from the farms as well as the environmental information that we'll have gathered on the farms as well. So it will help us to understand the balances between the carbon going in and out of the system against the financial side of the systems as well, and how importantly we can help these farms stay sustainable economically as well as environmentally sustainable, because as we all are hopefully aware that there are many changes at the moment in the farm subsidy system, and and particularly hill farmers are being overlooked in the support they're getting. So if we can offer a bit of understanding and to how they might access subsidies or make use of the assets they have on their farm to sustain the environment and the food system, then that would be a great achievement.
I agree. And you said a wee phrase a wee bit earlier on, which I thought I'd pick up and actually help our listeners navigate. And you talked about nature-based solutions. And this is a really sort of important area. And I wonder if you could just tell us what a nature-based solution is, just in broad outline, because this isn't about nature-based solutions. We may have somebody who will come in and talk about them in more depth. But just because you use a phrase, I think it's a nifty phrase, and it might help us understand the project as well.
Yeah, it is. It's a neat phrase. It's a broad term to describe how we can use nature and amplify nature to sequester carbon and lock it up. So all of the harm that we're doing, running our cars and getting on planes, if we can embellish the natural cycles that we have to sequester carbon and to lock it away, then we'll be, I don't like to use the word offsetting, but we'll be doing a bit better in our approach to the climate challenge that we have. And agricultural soils are a massive store of carbon. So to be able to understand that better in the landscape we have here and see how we could enhance that effect and stop us from losing the soils in the uplands going forward as the climate changes is a very important thing.
I mean, it must seem obvious because the Lake District farmers have invited you to work with them as part of this partnership, but are they really receptive to the work you're doing and to what you've found out so far, albeit only halfway through the KTP?
Yeah, we have a very good working relationship. It's a very open, equal one, and we're always in touch. So yes, it's not like I'm working for them. We're very much a team together, and they're so engaged and wanting to learn and receptive to new ideas and how we might approach the questions that it's been a fantastic experience. And I think Jan would say from the academic point of view as well that they're really great people to work with.
We've really enjoyed them because I think what I like about the KTP and how they approach things is that they're not going in with an idea of what the answer is, but going in with an open mind. And I think that really helps us work together more straightforwardly, but also they're super curious about the things that we might bring to it. And so, I love it. I really enjoy the project.
And I think because it's such a in vogue, trendy, the first time I've been trendy in my life kind of working on this project, because it's so much in the news at the moment and it is such a focus on Lake District farmers' customers' agenda and the suppliers, the farmers, everybody's talking about it, and it's such an evolving area that there is so much scope for not predefining what you want to get out of this and actually doing genuine research and asking the questions and wanting to be exploring what the answers might be rather than already saying what you want it to be, which can be the case with some research projects.
And I could imagine it could be so easy for farmers to be so intransigent about no, we can't look at that area, or we can't go in that direction, or no, that's entirely not what we were thinking about. So to have farmers there who are not doing that must be great. And again, speaks to the fact that they are involved in the KTP.
Absolutely, yes. The farmers are very open. The ones I've met, anyway, I've met quite a few, but not everyone, of course. But they've been very welcoming and wanting to explore the ideas and how things are going to change and what they just genuinely care that what they're doing is right.
So could you tell us then, Laura, what are the carbon issues at stake for farmers in this context?
Gosh, that's a rather large question to answer.
I love large questions.
For livestock farmers like we're talking about here, the big controversial issue is methane. So when we're working with beef farmers and sheep farmers, the production of enteric methane, which is what they burp and fart out of when they're digesting their food, is a massive contribution to global climate change. And it is what livestock farmers are being vilified about quite often in the media without people fully understanding the full picture, I think it would be fair to say. So that side of carbon agenda is a big worry for farmers, because they want to carry on farming and most people want to carry on eating the meat. So how do we address the methane problem is I would say top of the list for farmers. And then another carbon problem, but sort of on the radar of farmers, is offsetting and planting trees and hedgerows, and how to do that the right way without compromising their ability to make food. Because at the moment they're feeling forced into having to plant trees or take stock off the land, and that's compromising their financial sustainability. Whilst they want to do the right thing, it's also about getting that in balance with making food and actually putting the trees in the right place, for example, rather than just covering the landscape or planting them inappropriately. So it's about getting that balance. It's it needs to be negotiated and thought about carefully.
Are there any particular issues you come across with farmers in the Lake District that maybe are different to what you might come across the rest of the UK? And I know you were keen to talk about maybe comparisons with Jan's homeland, not of Scotland, but of New Zealand.
So I think the Lake District farmers, the soil, because I'm looking at soil, and we're talking about soil a lot in this these group of podcasts, that the soil in the Lake District where we farm up here is quite different to soil that might be found in other places in, let's say, England. Because it's quite shallow soil, they're less able to, there's less scope for them to improve or build that soil and so store more carbon on their land. And a lot of the research that's been done has been done in more lowland areas, on, say, mixed farms or more arable farms where the soil has been damaged, and because it's been damaged, there's more to fix. So there's potentially going to be a rift there where the farmers that haven't done so well by their soil in the past are going to get rewards, in inverted commas, for fixing that damage that they've done, whereas farms in the Lake District and other less favourable agricultural producing areas where the soil has been maintained better, or just naturally because the environment were wetter and colder, the soil is more stable and there's more carbon stored in it, then it's going to be potentially more difficult for them to benefit from any reward schemes or environmental schemes that's promoting this building up of carbon in the soils. I think that could be, I've had conversations, so I know it is a bit of a worry to farmers that they're not going to be recognised for the good work they have been doing in terms of looking after the environment compared with other farmers.
So when people are talking about the meat produced from farms and thinking about soil carbon and other carbon, there's a whole range of terms that I certainly read in the newspaper, and I'm sure that many of our listeners would also be hearing. So people talk about carbon neutral, talk about net zero, and then people also talk about carbon positive, and all of these things mean very different things, and it would be really nice for our listeners to hear about the distinction between those terms.
It's a tricky question. There are a lot of terms in what we call carbon literacy. The boundaries do blur between when people use them, and they're not always used correctly, or they're used interchangeably when they shouldn't be. So I'll start with trying to explain what net zero means, seeing as this project is called Towards Net Zero Meat Production. So net zero is a term that's used generally for companies or organisations. It's to describe them wanting to reach a state where the activities of their business, of their activities, the service they're providing, their product producing, as having no contribution to climate change through greenhouse gas emissions. But importantly, the distinction for net zero is that their ambition needs to be in line with achieving no further climate warming than 1.5 degrees Celsius above the agreed baseline, which is pre-industrial levels. So that's in line with the Paris Agreement. With net zero as well, there is the potential for organisations to account for active removal pathways of carbon as well, so what we generally call offsetting. But that can be through either natural solutions, like I've talked about before, the nature-based solutions, or it can be a technological solution such as locking carbon away underground. Then in comparison, we have carbon neutral, which is another term commonly used, and it's similar in the fact that it refers to there being no net increase in emissions of greenhouse gases as a result of an organisation's action or product they're making. But this is to be within a specified time period, and it doesn't have to relate back to the target of no further warming than 1.5 degrees. So that's an important differential there. I think there's no set ambition, there's no science-based target with being carbon neutral. It's a looser term and can be applied more broadly within organisations without them having to commit too strongly to a set target. And again, carbon neutral can include a business offsetting its carbon emissions if they aren't able to reduce, or once they have reduced as far as they are able to, and that's either with removal through planting trees or it can be avoidance as well. It's another alternative, or even more broadly, they could be encouraging other people to avoid emissions. And carbon positive just means all of that, but with a few more bells and whistles. So generally, I suppose the easiest way to do that is you plant more trees than you might need to. So that would be when you could say you were being carbon positive.
I just like to think that carbon positive was everyone doing all this, but with a smile on their face.
Well,
but there is a world beyond carbon when it comes to sustainability. I'd like to think that the whole course of this podcast has shown that, because we've discussed so many topics that aren't just about carbon and net zero, etc. So what else needs to be considered for farms in the Lake District beyond that?
Absolutely, that's a really good question, because that we do suffer from carbon myopia.
You're the one who studied biology, don't ask me.
Short-sightedness or tunnel vision. And there is especially farms in upland and farms generally really, but my area is in the uplands, that there are many benefits from farming livestock on these less favourable areas that we have in our county in Cumbria, that environmental benefits that just wouldn't be being nurtured or even created without farmers up there looking after the land in all weathers. So for example, an important aspect to some of the work I've seen so far in the uplands is peat bog restoration. And we're all aware how important, well, I hope we're all aware of how important peat is to storing and locking away carbon. However, a lot of our peatlands in the UK and across the world have been damaged, severely damaged in the past through peat extraction. And so through repairing these, we're preventing further losses of carbon. But also, importantly, for a place like Cumbria, who suffered a lot of flooding, it slows down the water flow from the hills down into the towns below and stores that water higher up, which is also really good because when the soils are wetter, they store and lock away more carbon. So that's a win-win. Another farm I've been to, just the act of how they're managing their grazing has yielded fantastic returns in plant biodiversity. It was spectacular to go and see out there early last summer the range of really rare flowers where you might only find them in one other place in the UK on this farm in Cumbria that had returned by the grace of how they were grazing their cattle on this rough ground, that were turning over the soil and exposing seeds so they could be germinated in this landscape. And so that's reinvigorating what we have been losing from the environment through intensive farming. So without that happening, we wouldn't be nurturing these environments to come back. So I think to broad brush say that livestock farming is a bad thing. I think it needs to be seen in context, not just on carbon, not just on methane, but in the wider environmental picture, because we need these plants to be there because they'll support the insects and they help the birds and the whole ecosystem starts with the plants.
Is there something about that landscape as well? Because it's a cultural, social landscape. And so in that respect, Cumbria and parts of it are a World Heritage Site. So and there's a different approach of thinking about farming, which might be prompted by carbon and biodiversity. Has that got a benefit in broader cultural terms as well?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad I'm sorry I've neglected to say that so far, actually, because that's very important to Lake District farmers as well. Dan, who set up the business, comes from a farming background, and farming is very much in his heart about wanting to keep the culture of the Lake District going. And if we weren't buying the meat that was being produced here, that is a massive loss to our societal infrastructure and our history and our social norms in this area would be lost, and it would be very hard to bring back. And on the side of that as well, there's farming of the rare breeds, which we have in upland farms because they're hardier, more suited to the environment. I think we're probably mostly aware of the Herdwick sheep, which is the classic Lake District icon. If we weren't farming, that breed wouldn't exist. And I think going back to climate change, if we look forward, we might need these rare breeds. We might not be able to farm anything else. They might be the only things that we can farm in as the climate gets challenged and harder to work and live in. We need to make sure we have these resources that we can use going forwards. The Lake District, the farms in the Lake District, they've been there for hundreds of years, generations. I've met farmers, 5 generations still working on that farm, and it goes back even further. How can we possibly go to them and say you must change the way you live and stop doing what you're doing, and just finitely, without working with them and seeing how we can help make them resilient for the future and support that way of life. It's a whole economy as well. Back to the accounting.
It is indeed. Accounting. Sorry, Paul, over to you.
You had to end on accounting. I was quite liking you being here, Laura, and then you decided to end on accounting. But that has been a really fascinating discussion that will sit so nicely with the discussions we've had with Lake District Farmers as an organisation and the discussions we're about to have in coming episodes with farmers themselves. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
So next time, Jan, we will be down on the farm. We're going to be talking to the farmers who are working on this project, and you just did a little jiggle to suggest that you are nowhere happier than when you're on the farm.
Well, if you remember our podcast with Alan about family business, well, I always knew, but I never knew how to describe it in that way. I come from a family business which was on the farm, and so the idea of getting to talk to farmers and hang around their sheds and have a good yarn is just heavenly.
We shall look forward to it. Until then, if you do have any questions for us here, please do email us pentlandcentre@lancaster.ac.uk. But until next time, I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jane Babington.